unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty brought to you in partnership with MyPillow.com. Merry Christmas, because it is still Christmas. Christmas Day, December 25th, is just the beginning of Christmas. Liturgically, in the church, we are in the Christmas octave, octave being Latin for 8, and 8 days, specifically having reference to the new creation, one more day than creation in Genesis. Likewise, we are also right smack dab in the middle of the 12 days of Christmas, recognized in well-known Christmas song. And in the church, we're also approaching what Catholics in the East call Little Christmas, meaning the Epiphany on January 6th, the arrival of the Magi from the East. And of course, all this Christmas celebration goes on right up until the feast of the baptism of our blessed Lord on February 2nd. So be sure and keep up your tree and your celebrations and festivity until then. The joy of Christmas is not contained to just one day, 1 week, almost not even a month. All that said, there is really only one authentic way to reflect on Christmas, and it goes way beyond the warm and fuzzy baby laying in the manger feeling. A deeper reflection reveals the reason why the second person of the Holy Trinity incarnated was to save us by way of sneak attack behind enemy lines. After the fall of Adam and Eve, salvation was impossible for us. Being with God in eternity was completely lost as a possibility. We all, the whole race, was in slavery to Satan. Heaven, meaning the beatific vision, was denied. We needed to be rescued, to be saved by something or someone outside of us. That's what we celebrate this time of year, not time with family and friends and great big dinners and presents and lit up trees and all of that. Those aren't bad or evil or anything of the kind in and of themselves, but they easily obscure the truth that on that night in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, the Son of God was born in human flesh to begin an overthrow of Satan's kingdom. History has proven it would be a bloody undertaking, very bloody, including the blood of the Bethlehem babe himself. The Prince of Peace was ushering in an era of human history that would be drowning in violence against him and his followers. Satan was caught completely off guard that night in Bethlehem, denied the vision of the heavenly hosts singing glory to God in the highest. He was prevented by divine ordinance from knowing that that was even transpiring. Even in the desert 30 years later, he was still unsure as he looked at Jesus. If you be the Son of God, Christ came to save and wage war to overthrow Satan. That prince laying in the hay was a killer, smiles and cooing and sleeping notwithstanding. He had a mission from the first moment of his presence in the womb of his blessed mother. That mission would require his life, and he knew it all from eternity. And now, like a lightning strike in time, he appeared in the backwaters of the Roman Empire into Satan's kingdom, a kingdom that had been marked for extinction by heaven. The clock was ticking. The hero had at last arrived in the fullness of time. Violence was about to be the order of the day, ushered in by the Prince of Peace. As Trump 2.0 begins to come into focus, it's important to remember that serious Catholics and others of goodwill didn't push for his return to the White House just to lower the price of eggs or gas. It was to restore America to being a truly Christian nation and to escape the spiritual slaughter of the last 60 years owing to the sexual revolution. What has that sexual revolution brought us? A declining population thanks to contraception and abortion, a meltdown of the family with all of its attendant evils, emotional illness, fatherlessness, divorce, cohabitation, abortion by the tens of millions, addictions all over the place. The list is too heavy to comprehend. It all exploded onto the scene in the 1960s, but was being prepared for many years earlier. To make America great again is about much more than just eggs and gas prices. Joining me now to talk about all of this is fellow Souls and Liberty contributor Stephen Wynn. Merry Christmas, Mr. Wynn. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas to you.
Yes, and all of our viewers and everything besides. It is odd times we're in. Exciting. Here we are. I remember when we very first debuted Souls and Liberty and In Depth here, we had the first graphic we had up was 105 days to go until the election. And here we are coming up on, not too far off, and still like quite the exact number, but 105 days since the election. Certainly very close. Anyways, we move into this. It's, we're not in this to have a better economy. We had a good economy under Clinton. We had a good economy under Reagan, and we still wound up where we are here on the cusp of communism having taken over. And by the way, don't count them out. They're just reeling. They're not dead. But you're seeing something of a, how would you phrase it? Kind of an intellectual awakening, at least, of the good angels of human nature. They're not all professing Jesus Christ as Lord and King, but they are saying there's something wrong with that system over there, that evil system over there. And my goodness, when Elon, who, he doesn't really talk about religion that much, but I believe he's agnostic. I think the one time I heard him say something, he was agnostic. I don't remember when that video was from, however. When agnostics who are operating on goodwill are acknowledging, wow, something's wrong with the way things are, that's certainly a good sign.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. And what's been really, really interesting is hearing Elon's views on the demographic crisis, basically on overpopulation versus underpopulation. For decades, it's really been bedrock to believe, at least for those on the left, to believe that the world is overpopulated. We've got to get the population growth down. We've got to get contraception and abortion legalized in every single country. Otherwise, humans, by sheer numbers alone, are just going to overwhelm the earth and basically outstrip its capacity to feed us. And this idea, it stretches back to the 1700s to an English economist by the name of Thomas Malthus, but it really has come to the fore over the past century or so, especially the past half century. And it's a bedrock belief of the environmentalist movement. It's been a cornerstone of U.S. development aid, for decades. You want millions of dollars of foreign assistance aid. Well, you've got to institute quote unquote family planning programs in your country, and we've done that. The U.S. taxpayers have funded all kinds of godless programs across Latin America, Asia, Africa as well, and so Musk coming out and saying, this is nonsense. This is exactly opposite to what we should be doing. It's very, very interesting because it's the first time you've heard anyone of prominence who could be considered, not necessarily a conservative or certainly a conservative Christian saying as much. So again, it's like with a number of his positions, it seems his eyes have opened simply because he's a person of goodwill.
Yeah, and interesting when you mentioned that sort of horrible litany of just U.S. foreign policy. Not to mention domestic policy. Why is Planned Parenthood getting hundreds of millions of dollars a year from the U.S. taxpayers? They're about reducing the number of children. They might say 90% of it is because of contraception. We all know the truth of that. 93%, 70%, 97% of it is because of abortion. But nonetheless, Planned Parenthood, domestically in the United States and international Planned Parenthood, both make about $1 billion a year in profit, not counting taxpayer subsidies. Why are we shoveling hundreds of millions of U.S. taxpayer dollars into the coffers of an already overflowing bank account on behalf of a nonprofit? But more to the point here, all of this has happened, continues to happen, because there is a misreading or not enough alleged followers of Christ on the wall, stepping into the breach, whatever analogy you want to use, to prevent this kind of thing. Let's just take contraception. It was a massive Uh, it was a massive push in the 1930s till the 1960s among Protestant congregations. Not every single Protestant in America, certainly, but the vast majority of Protestant denominations and their pastors and their followers were like, yeah, contraception, yeah. And, and unfortunately, by the time the 1960s rolled around, the same was becoming true of many Catholics as well. Not Catholic teaching, but individual Catholic leaders who they didn't really come out and say, oh, contraception's cool, although some of them did. They just didn't oppose it, and they just ignored it as a topic. I mean, you and I remember back in the church militant days in Detroit, I mean, when Cardinal Dolan came out and said, oh, we bishops, we got laryngitis over the question of contraception. Well, you still got it, Bishop, Cardinal. So there has been this laying down of the weapons when it comes to contraception, which really, if you were to sort of pick one policy, one approach by supposed followers of Christ that really greased the skids for all of the disaster we see in front of us right now, it's contraception. And those religious leaders, Catholic especially, but also Protestants that went along with this and even quietly supported it, and some of them vocally supporting it, man, yeah, we all got to stand in front of Jesus and account for our sins, but, not everybody's going to have the same weight around their shoulders.
Right. Yeah, it really was a progressive collapse. I think, many of our viewers will know, some may not, the first Protestant denomination to basically give their blessing to the use of contraception only in very limited instances, basically married couples who, were struggling, by reasons of finances, health, etc. That was green-lighted after years of debate by the Anglican Church at the Lambeth Conference in 1930. That really started the domino effect. And over the next 30 years, one by one, the major Protestant denominations basically surrendered on the issue of contraception. The last major denomination being the Southern Baptists in 1959. And so it is absolutely no wonder, it's no coincidence at all that once all the major Protestant denominations green-lighted contraception for use by their adherents, then suddenly we have the explosion, the sexual revolution coming to the fore in the 1960s. And it really is, it's progressive. It's fascinating to review history and see how this all happened. And of course, again, it's progressive. Initially, it was just for married couples under very limited circumstances. And then, gradually those circumstances widened. Why? Because human nature, man has fallen, and people like contraception. Frankly, they like being able to do whatever they want to do. They kind of become a slave to their own sexual appetites, and contraception allows them to do that. But it doesn't stop there. Ultimately that led to abortion. Then that led to the onslaught of the LGBT movement. Finally, euthanasia, trans, all the insanity that we see going on today. The seeds for that really were sown in 1930 when contraception was first blessed by the Anglicans, the Episcopalians in this country. And it's had a really devastating effect on the United States and really across the world. And again, it's fascinating. Elon has been pointing this out for some time. We've got a graphic here showing an X post that he sent out not too long ago. Basically, he points out that the U.S. birth rate has been below the sustainable replacement level for roughly 50 years. And look at that. Look at the graph. You just see how, suddenly right around 1970, once the sexual revolution really begins to take hold, suddenly fertility begins to plunge. And, by this time, the U.S. was a very, very affluent society. And selfishness essentially kicked in because, obviously raising a family, raising lots of children, that demands a great deal of self-sacrifice. Well, once people had a lot of cash in their pocket, they'd much rather spend that on whatever sort of material goods, were being proffered, rather than raising children, extending, families into the next generation. And that has just continued basically ever since then. It's really, really interesting. Elon does have, again, he's been very outspoken on this. He has, he's basically urging people, even if you're not, well off, he's urging people, young people, to get out there and to have a family, to start young. Don't wait until, your bank account is overflowing, because, our country needs this. Healthy societies need to have families, young, growing families. We've got an audio clip of him, advising in this direction. Let's take a listen to this.
My recommendation really would be, do not delay having a family. Even if things are tough, there's a baby crisis. The birth rate has plummeted. The birth rate in the United States has been below replacement rate since roughly when I was born in 1971. So that's a long time, and it's continued to decline every year. If there's no humans, means no humanity. So something's got to happen to turn around this crazy low birth rate, or we'll simply disappear. I think even if things are financially difficult, it's still, go for it with regard to a family.
Okay, and yeah, he's absolutely right there. It used to be very common for young people, to get married young, to not wait until they're 30 plus, and rising up the career ladder, having secured enough cash to have a house ready to go, and upon marriage, basically, a man and woman would get married young, and they would start building the life that they dream of together. And in the early years, it was rough going. People pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and there was something really, I don't know, special about building a life together. And
this is one of the things, Stephen, if I can just interrupt for a second. This was one of the driving forces in the election with the young vote.
Yes.
It'd be one thing for the young people's parents or their parents to have eschewed families because they wanted to, I don't know, have a yacht or, some, third house or whatever. But the young generation today, the, roughly, 20 to early 30s group, they're not even really given the choice. They can't get a house. They want to raise a family in an apartment. At some point that becomes impractical. It is very challenging. And that's why on sort of just the material temporal order, with a hat nod to the spiritual thing of wanting to have children and wanting to have a family and all of that, why that sort of first temporal domino has to fall over. An economy has to be created that is family friendly. It's not, our grandparents were not trying to raise a family where 45% of their money went to taxes. So there is this interplay. It's what we do here on Souls and Liberty. We talk about the interplay between the material world, the liberty part, and the immaterial world, the souls part. These two have to live in some sort of back and forth harmony with each other. And when you've got evil, greedy, communist, leftist, woke bastards trying to destroy the country, for their own ideological reasons, but the impact of that in just the temporal world, that's what Elon's pointing out here. And, hats off. What you're saying is exactly correct. But, there's all these, 25-year-olds sitting there watching going, well, that's all fine and good, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and so forth. But, I don't have any money. I'm still living at home because I can't even afford rent, much less save up money to, put a down payment on a house that I'm not going to be able to afford the monthly payment on. All of this, the destruction of the family and everything that goes along with that on the perimeters of it, has all been part of the Marxist plan here for 100 years. And, take little by little, there's the emotional damage that, contraception causes because let's face it, dads run off and, do what they want, or, they impregnate, 5 different women. I mean, that's, kind of Elon's story. I don't know if it's 5 different women, but, I think he's fathered to children from 3 different moms, I think, right? And, even Donald Trump has something of that story. So there is all of this temporal stuff. They're obviously, beyond the reach of the financial concerns and constraints of all of that, but most people aren't. But the point is that up and down the socioeconomic ladder, the idea of lack of responsibility when it comes to sexual exploitation and all of that, why is there a child pornography sex ring habit, that's engaged in by hundreds of thousands of men? Why are hundreds of thousands of children missing? When you've got a culture that is super sexualized, like the U.S. is, and Europe too, the West, how did we get to be this way? Ultimately, it all traces back to contraception. And where did contraception come from? Came from the Church of England. Where did they get it from? Drum roll, please. The Rockefellers. It was that obsession at the end of the 19th century and the very beginning part of the 20th century about eugenics and getting rid of the unfit races and all of that stuff, and it just spilled over. Pandora's box opened, and that's all she wrote. To get America back to a place prior to that, this is an enormous mountain to move. It ain't about just gas and eggs.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, a number of other countries, Russia, Hungary, Greece, all formerly, solid Christian countries, their fertility rate has plummeted, even worse than ours have, and because they have right-leaning governments, they have tried to institute measures to correct this trend, basically to really try to stimulate the birth rate, and they've had some success, but really it's been rather marginal. Not one of them has lifted the birth rate above the replacement level of 2.1, and let alone returned it to what it used to be, 3, 4, whatever, plus children per woman, and so that really does underscore like you said, the enormity of the task before us. I think under Trump, whatever we can do to make it easier to have families, to incentivize childbirth, child rearing, through tax policy, et cetera, we've got to do that. But I think in order to really turn back this trend, it's going to take a moral revolution in this country. We've got another clip from Elon where he, I think, inadvertently kind of points this out a little bit. We'll speak on that here in just a second. Let's take a listen to the clip.
What ended most civilizations was a low birth rate. That is, an extended period of prosperity seems to cause birth rates to plummet. And it's somewhat counterintuitive. When a society is under stress, birth rates increase. So if you look at, say, ancient Rome, the birth rates were super high when they were fighting the Carthaginians, and Rome's very life was at stake. Birth rates were all-time high. After they defeated Carthage and ruled the Mediterranean, the birth rates plummeted, and to such a degree that Julius Caesar even tried to pass, laws like in 50 BC or something like that to give an incentive for any Roman citizen that would have a second or third child. So they were having birth rate issues in 50 BC, which is pretty wild. And that was also true of really basically every civilization throughout history. So it's how do you avoid this birth rate collapse, it's a sort of prosperity trap. I don't have a great answer for that, except I think if we can at least bring it to conscious awareness that we need to continue as a civilization, like no humans, no humanity. And at least it's a topic of conversation. It's like, hey, it's something we should do something about. And we definitely want to get rid of this ridiculous notion that there are too many humans on Earth. This is false. Yeah. there's a lot of people who think that the environment can't sustain this number of humans. It's totally untrue. We could double the population of Earth and still not have a significant environmental impact. So, like, if you could fit all of the humans on one floor in the city of New York. So that's like 8 billion humans sounds like a lot, but actually, if you're, say, if you're in an airplane and you're going from here to LA or wherever, and you look down, how often do you see a human? If your goal was to drop a ball on a human while flying from here to LA, you'd have a hard time. So the actual density of humans is very low. And Earth's capable of easily having far more humans, and should, in my opinion.
So yeah, as he said, this is not really necessarily a new problem. This the problem of demography, of collapsing birth rates, it really seems to afflict every sort of major civilization throughout time. He specifically mentioned ancient Rome. 50 BC, they were having this problem, trying to incentivize the birth of more children. Well, what was ancient Rome at that point, 50 BC, 50 years before the birth of Christ? It was pagan. And, it may have been a religious nation, but it was basically, built, a lot of the social life was built on the pursuit of pleasure. And that is what the United States, that's what all the countries of the West have become over the past century plus, is pagan, increasingly, more and more and more. We've abandoned God, walked away from him and his statutes, and embraced the flesh, embraced sex. That really is our idol today. And as a result, we have, you turn on the TV, most of the headlines you see, negative headlines are related in some fashion to the abuse of sex, rape, teenage pregnancies, STDs, all kinds of things. Negative headlines, negative trends really stem back to the abuse of sexuality. And so until we recover a Christian ethic and really return to our Christian roots, really, as taught by the Catholic Church, we're not going to turn this problem back, effectively. We can ameliorate it through tax policy and whatnot, through incentives, but it really is going to take a moral revolution to turn back to where we need to be.
Yeah, I don't think you can. What do all these other civilizations do? They saw their numbers declining. Certainly in the case of Rome, they saw the numbers declining while the numbers of barbarians at the borders were increasing. So what did they do? Immigration. They brought all kinds of people in. That is Starmer just said that. I think it was 3 weeks ago, in front of the, British lawmakers. He said, this has been a plan that has failed, that we were going to bring all these people in from outside the country and shore up our own this, that, and the other, and it has failed. It was all part of a master plan to destroy us interiorly. Well, okay, good. These are the kinds of conversations that need to start being had. It isn't enough to just argue about policy and taxation, and I'm not saying all those things need to go by the wayside. They don't. They're important. They need to be had, but they need to be had on the canvas of this hedonistic culture that we're in. It needs to be, taken on head on, and a conversation needs to begin and be advanced by the likes of, Elon Musk, for example. Is he going to, is he the guy we're going to turn to for like the greatest moral teaching of the universe? No, but somebody has to, sort of knock that first domino over and start the conversation going, which I don't know if he started the conversation going. He's, put something out there, but you talk about, everybody can, whine and bellyache about eggs and gas and, the relative wage, or the increase in wages relative to inflation and all of that, because those are all those high up there on these charts and numbers and stuff things. You talk about sex, and all of a sudden it becomes very individual. And, a lot of people immediately become uncomfortable. Not only because they're, squeamish about the topic, but because they're like, oh God, that's me. I didn't do anything to drive the price of eggs up. I didn't do anything to make gasoline, twice as much as when Trump was in office. Screw those bastards. What? Get them out of office. Yeah, but did you contribute to the decay and decline of the culture by, getting your girlfriend pregnant? Did you contribute to the decline of the culture by murdering your child? How many of those 77 million Trump voters a couple months ago, how many of us have contributed to that in one way or the other? And how many of us are willing to apply the brakes, find the nearest off-ramp, and turn around and reverse direction? I bet you it's not a very high number. So we're all in favor of lower egg prices and gas and all that. Everybody will get on that off-ramp and make a U-turn. I don't think you're going to have so many on the other side. And if that doesn't happen, all we're doing is just, as Robert Bork said, slouching towards Gomorrah. That's all that's happening. It's just, we've pumped the brakes on Biden and the communists, but we're still sliding down the hill. At some point, you got to turn around and do the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting has got to be, we have to admit as a nation, almost to a man, that one way or another, we've participated in this, either by our direct actions or our silence in regard to all of this. Don't want to be the unpopular one at the cocktail party. We've supported our friend who wanted to go get an abortion. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, the list is, endless. We don't go to CVS and say, why do you have these condoms out here in the front? Just anybody can go get them. Why do you have Plan B sitting there? All of this sort of stuff. It's so ingrained in the culture at this point. Kind of like trying to extract the salt from chicken noodle soup.
Yeah. It's one of the things that really has been so disconcerting to me, that really opened my eyes to the state of the U.S. is just developments on the abortion front post Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was overturned in June of 2022. And, pro-lifers everywhere celebrated, finally, after half a century, we won this victory. Well, we did win that victory, and we've lost almost every single one since then by popular vote. There have been abortion referendums in more than a dozen states since then, a majority in states that Trump won in November. And in almost every state, I think there were two exceptions, Florida and South Dakota. Everywhere else that there's been an abortion referendum, the pro-life side has lost. And so you've got millions of, quote unquote conservatives out there who, they want their guns and they want their low taxes. They may even want the chance to homeschool, but they also want recourse to abortion. And that just shows how ultimately the self, the flesh, is really at the center of so much of what we're working for, fighting for. It's not Christ and his teachings, it's man and his appetites, essentially. And so, we've got a long way to go before we can really correct that.
Yeah, it's as a matter of fact, we've got enough of a long way to go. We're going to take a break and come back and talk about how might this happen? How did we get here? I think it's important to understand how we got here, beyond just the sort of the appetites thing. I mean, a legal path was cleared through the woods here. And of course, as we all know, once something becomes legal, it seems to have take on a whole life of its own as far as acceptance. And there's a legal history here setting all of this up, contraception and abortion. And we'll talk about that right after this.
I'm excited to announce our Christmas extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. Our famous My Slippers, they haven't been on sale for over a year. Regularly $119.98, now only $59.98. Our 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with extremely limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list. Bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save on all MyPillow products. For example, flannel sheets for as low as $59.98, or our 6-piece towel sets, just $29.98. But that's not all. I'm extending our 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st of 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 or more ship absolutely free.
Or as we come back from that break, if you want to support what we do here at Souls and Liberty, this is how we talk all the time. It's souls and liberty, the immaterial with the material, because that's how we are. God made us as a composite. We are the only creatures on earth that have both a rational soul and a body, a physical body. We live in time and space, but we exist outside of time and space at the same time. So it's, you can't approach what we do, what the country has to do, from just one side or the other. Both need to be incorporated. Obviously, the spiritual dimension is higher, but not to the exclusion of the temporal one. So if you like what we do here and how we talk here, please feel free to click on that donate button and give us whatever you feel like you would like to in support, and thank you in advance. All right, Stephen, let's go back for a second before we get into how do we do all of this. I do want to say that if you remember when Amy Coney Barrett was being going through her nomination process, Senator Dick Blumenthal kind of got right to it. Because remember, the big thing was, oh my gosh, she's replacing RBG, and Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned. That can't happen. But the bigger point, which I thought was very interesting, is that the left immediately sliced right through the question about Roe and went straight back to an earlier Supreme Court ruling and grilled her on that because they began to sense, you roll back abortion in Roe v. Wade and say there's no constitutional right to that, you're going to go straight to there's no constitutional right for contraception either. Which, by the way, there's not. So walk us through that little history first. Let's look at the Supreme Court rulings, which really kind of blew up everything on a state level with regard to contraception, paving the way for abortion.
Okay, yeah, there were two major cases that really paved the way for abortion. One was Griswold v. Connecticut. That was a 1965 landmark ruling that essentially established the right to privacy. We hear that in the abortion arguments all the time. The case involved a Connecticut law which made it illegal for married couples to use contraception. It was brought by Estelle Griswold, who was the CEO of Planned Parenthood of Connecticut. We have a graphic here. We see her here on the steps of the Planned Parenthood Center in New Haven, which is really sort of ground zero for this case. Now, the court ruled 7-2 in favor of Griswold. And struck down the law as really an invasion of privacy. Another graphic here showing Griswold. She's there on the left, celebrating the ruling there. The case had a major impact on later Supreme Court decisions.
What year was that? What year was Griswold?
That was 1965.
65. Okay.
Yep. And
right in the heart of the sexual revolution. Go figure. Yep, exactly. It all happens at once. And once the dominoes start to fall, they fall very, very quickly. And really that really set the precedent for Roe v. Wade. As I said, it expanded the right to privacy and to include, the use of contraception. And ultimately, it really impacted, cases involving so-called gay rights and so forth. So that was in 1965. 7 years later, in March of 1972, we had another case, which was Eisenstadt v. Baird. And this was very interesting because, again, we've talked about how progressive the moral collapse is. Eisenstadt v. Baird, it basically allowed it centered in Massachusetts, but interesting, both of these states, Connecticut and Massachusetts, high percentage of Catholics there. But basically, it allowed contraception to be used by unmarried couples. First, we had married with Griswold, and then 7 years later, we have the green lighting contraception to be used by unmarried couples.
And that essentially legalized heterosexual sex, premarital sex across the country. So that was another major domino to fall. And the key figure in this case, Bill Baird, he went on to become a big time promoter of abortion. We've got a graphic here showing him at a pro-abortion rally. He's there right at the center. So you just see how these folks aren't wanting to just ameliorate financial difficulties for married couples. They want the whole gate, all doors flung open, and basically they accomplished that. So Eisenstadt was decided in March. I said is March of 1972. 10 months later, what do we have? We have Roe v. Wade legalizing abortion across the country, and we've never looked back since then.
Yeah, I remember seeing watching it live. The Walter Cronkite CBS Evening News. I used to watch it every night as a kid because I was a nerd. And I'm sitting there, basically 12 years old, not quite 12, going on 12, and watching the news. And I remember that little Supreme Court graphic coming up over his shoulder. And there was just that, it was just like a reader, what we call in the industry, a reader, where all you do is just read the script and move on to the next story. There's no video, there's no reporter, there's no nothing. It's sort of the most minimal way you can treat a story. And you said, the Supreme Court today legalized abortion throughout the country, making it declaring it to be a woman's constitutional right. And I think there was another sentence, and on they went to the next story. The most explosive thing that would result in the deaths of 70 million Americans over the next 50 years was just a reader on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Younger folks won't have the slightest idea what I'm talking about. Older folks, you'll remember some of this. And as you think about all of this going through, there was the great cultural push behind the scenes for this. I mean, the month before Roe v. Wade, there was the 2-part series on the CBS Entertainment Network show called Maude, where they had a very popular show starring B. Arthur and Adrienne Barbeau as mother and daughter. And she was in a conundrum about whether she should have an abortion or not. And in New York, it was legal at the time in December of 1972. It was not legal. Roe wouldn't happen for another month. It wouldn't be ruled on for another month, or at least announced. And, there was this big, and I remember sitting there watching that show. My mom and dad and I used to watch that. When we were all, in front of the TV at the same time. And I turned to my mom. I said, "Mommy, what's abortion?" And she says, "That's when they go into the mommy's tummy and kill the baby." I'm like, "What?" So, it's sort of that if you grew up in this environment, these polluted waters, and you didn't have a kind of shell of protection around you, and in my case, my mom didn't present it to me as a teaching of the church or the Bible says or anything like that. My mother in an analogy could have been an atheist. All she was doing was just telling me the basics of the story. They go inside the mommy's tummy. Well, not exactly tummy, but you know what I mean. Go inside the mommy's tummy, they kill the baby. Okay, it's what it is. In its simplest terms, explaining to an 11-year-old, that's what it is. And but many people came to just accept, and here we are 50, 60 years later, accepting what you have outlined in state after state after state, that it has just become so commonplace in America, just such a normal thing that, that's just what it is. Same is true in Canada to the north, and most, I can't think of a Western country where this isn't the case. How do you dial back from that to even get back to the question of contraception? Can you imagine if a referendum was put before voters? Forget about abortion. Put a referendum in front of voters in 2026 in, 30 states. make them all red states. Trump won 31 states, and all those 31 states put in a referendum saying, hey, we're going to outlaw contraception. I think the betting markets would take a spread on how huge that would go down in flames. So it's the sexual revolution. If that isn't defeated, none of this stuff really matters. This stuff now does matter in the short term. The immigration, the borders, the economy, all this sort of stuff matters. But if those things are restored and they're like, okay, our job is done here, we're going to be right back in the same place we were in 2024. And actually, they will have marshaled their forces, them being the communists, and they will come back with a greater vengeance than they had even this past election year.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult. With abortion alone has been hard enough because the principal victims, really, the crime goes unseen, unheard. You can't hear the unborn screaming as they're ripped apart or poisoned to death. And so that has been a real uphill battle. Obviously, contraception. The victims are even quieter. They're even more silent. Basically, the ramifications are more hidden. Abortion perhaps is more. It is. It's more immediate. But the decay that happens with contraception, it's gradual, and so it's very difficult, to get into people's heads why it is so destructive. And again, I think to really triumph, we're going to have to see a return to morality, and not just morality, because I know a lot of very, very good moral Christians, evangelicals, who get it. They're on the right path in every case except for contraception. They just don't. They haven't connected the dots there, and so it's not. It can't just be good old fashioned general Christian morality. It's got to be Catholic morality, and if only we
and
had
really on this schedule on this point. Let me just interrupt you here on this point, Stephen, because I think it's an important thing for Catholics and Protestants to understand. It's not actually Catholic morality; it's natural moral law that is announced by the church. The natural moral law precedes the church, at least the establishment of the visible institution of the church that we have known for 2,000 years. This is not a Catholic teaching in that sense that, here, you have to believe this. This is something which predates the church, and the church just announces it. The Catholic Church just announces it, recognizes what it is, and then, includes it, incorporates it in the teaching, announces it in the teachings. And frankly, I don't think there is another religion. I can't. I might be wrong. There might be some obscure of the 40,000 Protestant denominations. There might be an obscure one here or there that not only teaches the right thing, actively teaches the right thing when it comes to contraception, but connects the dots back to the natural moral law. I mean, the very first command God gives humanity is be fruitful and multiply. And, if it comes from the mouth of God, that's where it comes from. The fact that the church Catholic Church just amplifies that in its teaching doesn't make it a Catholic teaching. And I think perhaps part of the problem with some of this is, I think this is a multi-layered thing, but certainly some Protestants are resistant to this because they see it as a Catholic thing. And it isn't a Catholic thing. It's a truth that pre-exists the church because it comes from the mouth of God back in Genesis. And the church just amplifies that. And that's a really important point to, elaborate on. And, are there people like J.D. Vance and, others in the Trump administration who understand this across the board? You gotta hope that they are, that those people understand it and that's incorporating into what they do. And another perhaps helpful analogy is that the mathematical, arithmetic truths of the universe existed before man was even created. There was such a thing as distance between, the moon and the earth or whatever. When a ray of light hits at this angle, it creates another, or comes down at this angle, it creates another angle. All of those things, they pre-exist arithmetic. The area of arithmetics, they pre-existed. We didn't invent math, human beings. We simply discovered it and then incorporated it into things like engineering and buildings and everything else. But it pre-exists us. Well, it's the same thing here. These divine truths pre-exist the church. And the church, just because the church's founder is Christ himself, they're like, oh, he said all of this. Now let's just build this into the teaching because that's what it is. That's a point that you can't be a follower of Christ, an authentic follower of Christ, authentic, genuine follower of Christ. And you can be ignorant of things, but you can't know about them and then disregard them. That's two different types of people. And I would venture to say that most Americans who claim to be that they're followers of Christ are just kind of ignorant of all of this, certainly here in these last 20 or 30 years, which is why one of my favorite topics to bang on, the U.S. bishops have a duty. They have an obligation before Almighty God to strive to begin to restore this sense, the truth of natural moral law being preached across their pulpits, taught in their seminaries, churning priests out who understand it and can enunciate it. And you know what? If you get this massive pushback, which is, of course, what they've been afraid of for decades, that people are going to walk out, your donations are going to go down, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? That's not your call. You're obligated to tell the truth. What happens, happens. That's not your decision, but it is your decision to open your mouths and begin a restoration. Do you care about America or do you not? I mean, the bishops are all there, immigration, social justice, but they happen to get $1 billion a year for that. But when it comes to opening their mouths where they might lose the $1 billion a year and more, then they fall silent. God help these men. And a lot of them are actually moving off the stage right now. They're all getting, they're all in their very, mid to early 70s, handing in their resignation letters. These men were to go back to the sexual revolution and connect the dots. These men were in seminary while the sexual revolution was just beginning to, engulf the country. So they've grown up in this and are just as contaminated in their intellects and their will as anybody else. But anybody else doesn't have grace of office like a bishop does. And that's the fine distinction that they better start doing something about this because they're not.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, I think there's a very important point that you made. And I think if we were to get that message out, I think it could be very effective to a lot of Protestants of goodwill. Everyone hears, in the media, the Catholic Church, birth control, they roll their eyes, whatever. But yeah, that is a very important distinction. I'm glad you made that. That it's not a Catholic teaching; it's a Catholic enunciation of the truths of natural law. That's fundamental. And that perhaps a lot of Protestants who may have qualms with the Church, with Catholic teaching in other areas, that might open some eyes, I don't know, that could be a breakthrough. That's very interesting. But yeah, right now it's up to people like us to get that message out. Unfortunately, we have far too few bishops who are willing to speak out and to lead the charge in this area. But as you say, many of the old guard, the left, they are passing from the scene. And hopefully the upcoming generation, the new guard, will be much more vocal about it because they need to be. The future of our country depends on it.
Yeah, it really does. The future of the country, ultimately the future of souls, is dependent on this. yes, your culpability in an evil act may be mitigated. Well, not maybe, is mitigated depending on your knowledge about something. But your knowledge isn't completely 100% dependent on somebody else telling it to you. Certainly not in this age of information. You can hear this and go, you could hear this at a cocktail party. You could hear this at a whatever. Imagine if you're just standing around some backyard barbecue and, some crazy conservative Catholic said, yeah, contraception, it goes against natural moral law that God set up. It has nothing to do with Catholic Church teaching. Church teaching just enunciates an earlier law. Okay, there you go. You've heard enough now. Maybe you haven't heard everything, but you've heard enough to go, Well, if you hear, in your head and you're like, screw it, I'd just rather have, consequence-free sex. Well, then now you're not non-culpable anymore. You may not be 100% culpable. That's all God's call. And, I'm not judging souls, but I am saying the way the church lays this out, when you come to know of something, however you come to know of it, you now have an obligation to act on it. And God has written into each of our hearts, written on our hearts, the natural moral law. So it's this is life of the nation, which eventually is going to come to an end one way or the other. But this is also, most importantly, the life of souls, which will not come to an end. Stephen, we've got 20 seconds left. Wrap us up, brother.
All right. Yeah, I just think that we've got a lot of work to do. We've been saying this, the past several weeks. The election is just the beginning. And there's obviously a lot going on in D.C., but there needs to be a lot going on in every household, every Christian, every conservative household in this country. We've got to be fighting, getting the word out, educating ourselves. And it's going to be a long fight ahead. But we've got to push forward. We've got to do it because, as you say, future of the nation and the future of souls, that's ultimately what's at stake.
Yeah, it absolutely is. All right, that's it for this part of the Christmas season. We'll leave it there, Stephen, and say Merry Christmas. Thanks for joining us, brother. Appreciate it as usual.
Merry Christmas to all of you.
All right, very good. And just wrapping up again, if you like what you hear here, if you want to support what we do here, please feel free to click on the donation link and help us out in whatever way you can. In the meantime, continuing Merry Christmas. This is Gary Michael Voris coming to you from Houston, Texas. Wahoo Yahoo! God love you.